image.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Hello, this is Wazo X Wazo, Evil O, and once again I'm coming to you from Baroda, Faculty of Fine Arts at MSU University. And this afternoon we're talking with Indrapramit Roy.
That's correct.
I got the name right. I always stumble over. I always stumble over that first name. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
But he's a fabulous artist. I really love his art. But also he's known as a very good educator. Many students talk about him as their favorite teacher. So we're going to talk a little bit about your art and a little bit about education. Okay. So where should we start? With your art?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you follow very nicely actually from the interview I just did with Alec Ball this morning, because I often see your paintings as also being very focused on the urban landscape. I'm thinking of some that almost look like aerial views of cities looking down. There's one I'm thinking of with the firework coming up. Some of your, I think they're oils, they're not acrylics, are they?
Those, the two you mentioned, are both watercolors.
Are both watercolors? Okay. I see you have to correct me on these things. And then there's one where you're looking through the windows of like a high rise and you can see the different people within the high rise doing things.
Is a watercolor.
But you also deal with landscape and how sort of sprawl happens into landscape, somewhat similar to what Alec is doing. So do you want to just talk about like the concerns behind your art as a first introduction?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Kolkata, then Calcutta, and my upbringing was very urban. The first time I actually confronted the rural was when I was studying in Shantiniketan, where I did my undergraduate studies for 5 long years between 1982 and 87. I was there. And that really taught me very many things, but in terms of what I paint, I have always been very urbane, if you like. So when I was actually preparing for a talk that I'm going to deliver tomorrow in Surat, and I was going through the presentation, and I see the earliest that I'm going to show is from 1991-92, when I was still doing my second master's in the Royal College of Art in London, and they were also entirely concerned with the city. Nocturnal city is something that always held my interest, and I'm also interested in this, as far as time is concerned, the liminal zone between day and night, when it's kind of undefined. You don't know whether it's a day breaking or whether it's a day ending, because it's always that crossovers that interest me. When I look at 19th century painting, for instance, that interest fascinates me because it's meeting of two cultures.
Right.
When I look at theatre, which is the first arts that I grew up with, my father was engaged with theatre. He was an actor and a director, also a playwright, but majorly an actor and a director. I like theatricality, so that is also there. You mentioned the fireworks.
Yeah, the firework coming up from the aerial view is very noticeable and wonderful.
There are certain sort of underlying threads that I can locate way back to the beginnings of my painterly career in 1990s, in the early 90s, because before that I was actually trained as a printmaker in China.
I was going to say, you started your education in printmaking, right? You're one of those printmakers who made a shift over to painting at some point. To your advantage, I think.
I would think so, because I somehow opted for printmaking because that, in my time, was the most interesting happening department in Shantiniketan. So not really based on what I wanted to do, but as it turned out that certain things that I learned in printmaking stayed with me. I like the surprise element of a print, that till you pull it, you don't really know what will come on the paper. Right. You may have done any number of things on the plate, on the matrix, but till the print gets transferred on the paper, you still not.
I think this is why a lot of the students that I talk to, because they are in the printmaking department or graduated from the printmaking department, that's why they like you so much, because they know you have that sensitivity towards printmaking, which many of the people who are just in the painting department don't necessarily have that, because there's a tendency I always hear in the painting department to sort of look down on the printmaking department.
Oh.
Is that true or no?
Yeah,
You
not
disagree?
here. Not
No?
here. No, I'm very fortunate to have a bunch of colleagues who I'm on the same wavelength with. So I don't see that happening, that hierarchy, so to speak. But by and large, yes, in the general art scene, yes, there is certainly that hierarchy. You kind of tend to look down on printmakers a little bit, if especially people who are full-time printmakers. There are many artists who've done prints as an extension.
Right.
But there are printmakers who've done not anything else but prints.
I have
They
a problem,
sometimes-
you know, I formed that large collection of Indian printmaking.
Yes.
But I have a problem with many printmakers because they focus so much on the technique and they
Yes.
always want to explain technique. And I don't care about technique so much. I really care about what is the finished results and what are you trying to say. You should think of your printmaking just like a painter would. You know, what are you trying to say or accomplish, and like the technique is secondary. Because painters don't sit around talking about how they've painted the painting so much. It's like
No, that used to bug me a lot because people, when they come to critique your work, the first reaction would often be that, oh, the black is not black enough, or that the registration is not quite correct,
Right.
and things like that, which I thought was really, I mean, it's not that you can't learn something from there, but that cannot entirely be the topic of discussion when you're showing a visual.
And to me, it still drives me crazy that printmakers, and this seems to be a long tradition, but when they make an etching or a wood cut or a dry point, then on the bottom of the print, they always write in the middle, etching, wood cut.
We were taught
and
that
I'm
that
like,
is the
yeah,
way
that's
it
what
should be
everybody's
done.
taught, but I'm like, as a painter, if you're painting in oils or acrylics or watercolor, you don't write at the bottom, watercolor. You know, or as a
You used to write it
photographer,
at
you
the
don't
back
write
of it.
photograph, you know, it's like, well, the medium should be a secondary concern, I feel, in some ways. Would you agree or no?
Yes, totally. I couldn't agree more. And one of the reasons why I made that shift was because I was feeling a little constricted, although that's not the case anymore. I think the whole world has moved ahead. But in my time, there was that whole notion of purity of prints, and edition prints in particular. So if you had pulled a monoprint, you are not considered a printmaker. If you have hand painted a print, then it's like sacrilege. So all those things are gone, have gone for good, and I'm very glad that they're gone. But one thing that I felt restricted is that you have to, first of all, focus in so much on the technicalities, and the other thing that I did find trouble coping with was that you have to actually conceive of the image almost in completion before you
Yes.
start working on it.
It doesn't give you the same freedom as a painting to make
Yeah, I
adjustments
suppose if
as
you are a
you go
master of
along.
technique, you could get that, but I wasn't, and so I chickened out.
Right. Like Anthropocene, I think, goes back to her plate sometimes and makes changes. I mean, some printmakers do.
She is a
you
master
know. She's a
craftsperson,
master,
so-
right.
The craft of printing.
And the other thing, when we exhibited print collection, I mean, we traveled it through 3 cities, and it was like, it was not just our show, but every show, but there's always this real, like, almost demand among the printmakers that, well, you have to have videos that explain the process. You have to explain the process. And I'm like, why can't we just sort of have this expectation that give the viewer some credit that they understand the process of printmaking and that they just judge the image, you know, because painters don't put in explanatory videos of how they paint generally in an exhibition. But
No,
printmakers
but
always do.
You know what? There is a very long history to that, because Indian printmakers, especially of the 20th century, always believed that eventually the dissemination of prints would be far wider than painting, and they would thereby be able to approach a market which existed for artwork amongst the middle classes who can't necessarily afford a painting. With that idealistic premise, many an attempt were made, making of folios, making of art fairs of prints, where prints were really sold for very cheap. Even people like Somnath Kaur, Shanatkar, who were my teachers, I saw them selling them for next to nothing because they believed that it should reach homes of people. The unfortunate consequence is that after they made a name, it all landed up with, collectors and galleries, and we're selling for astronomical prices, which are comparable with painting prices, blah blah blah. And there is still that reticence in a general gallery goer. If he walks into the gallery, that is after all a print. So the print is kind of in opposition to an original work. So artists felt compelled to explain that a print, which is made by the artist in this process, is no different from an original work.
The whole confusion between a print and a reproduction. I mean, even when we showed the collection in Delhi at the India Habitat Center, one woman went through the whole show. She came, she said, "Oh, these are just marvelous prints. Where do you keep the originals?" You know, like that. So I mean, there's just this misunderstanding of what the whole process is about. So I do sympathize on some level. But was there for you like a eureka moment when it's just like, okay, I've had enough of printmaking, I'm going to go to painting? Did you abandon printmaking altogether, or do you still go back and do a print? I do.
Almost on a regular clip. Not too much, but at least 1 or 2 prints I do almost every year. I love that. I don't terribly into technicalities. I want to keep it simple. I'm very fascinated by the quality that you get in line etching, and I want to kind of restrict myself there. Although when I was a student, I was doing a whole lot of lithographs and all kinds of technical things. But I'm kind of not interested in that anymore. I'm not that I don't enjoy looking at it in others, but I don't want to go there anymore. But like I said, I was joking, I chickened out. But when I came to Baroda to study painting, that's when I made the switch for my master's after 5 long years of my undergraduate in Shantiniketan, where 3 years I did exclusively printmaking. I thought it is being a bit restrictive, and I wanted a larger canvas, so to speak. And I wanted to not start from some images that I already have in my head. So it was much more about mark making, gestures and stuff. Eventually it will become a very recognizable image. I mean, I was not into abstraction in that sense. But I was also not prepared to have a ready image that is transferred into a matrix and then it gets printed.
Right.
So I needed that freedom, and I struggled for 2 years here. I produced very bad paintings. I don't share them with anybody. Even when I look at them, I feel ashamed.
So let's switch the conversation to art pedagogy for a little bit, because so many students that I've met in Baroda, they will often name you as their favorite teacher, honestly. I don't know why that is. Maybe you have some ideas. One thing I noticed about you is you seem to be very direct in the way you express yourself.
I don't believe in beating around the bush.
No.
I like teaching. That's all I can say to answer that question. I enjoy it hugely. I never consciously thought that I will end up teaching in Baroda ever. When I left, I thought this is it, final goodbye to Baroda. But I realize now, with the benefit of hindsight, that even when I was traveling in Europe, I was feverishly collecting slides. For who, I don't know. I somehow had this at the back of my mind that someday I may share this with somebody.
Right.
Now, who that somebody was not defined.
Slides of European art?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wherever I went, whether it's old European art, early Renaissance, pre-Renaissance, post-Renaissance, you name it, contemporary, wherever I could, I would spend a large chunk of my budget went in collecting the slides. And I still have them. Unfortunately, that technology is completely obsolete now, and you can get sharper images in the net.
It's hard to find a slide projector these days.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you do find one, to replace the bulb would be quite a job.
Right.
But I did that, and I'm now coming to think about it. I suppose somewhere at the back of my mind it was there that someday I would be sharing this with. So that whole thing about sharing, what is an art teacher?
So when you teach class, do you do a lot of presentations,
yes,
visual
it's
presentations?
entirely almost presentation, except for when we are having a critique, which is mostly.
So you incorporate a lot of art history, which is very essential, obviously. Do you have any criticisms of art pedagogy in India, the way it exists? as a whole? Like you see room for improvement in
There is always
the
room for
departments? I
improvement.
mean, what do you think are some of the biggest problems in the way students are taught?
Well, one of the problem is that we have basically 3-4 strands of art pedagogy. One that comes from the old British academic schooling, which is where most of the important historic art colleges were. Then you have a pedagogy of the Guru Shishya Parampara that comes from another traditional atelier system. And then of course you have the new system where the best of everything is, and that was in a way embodied in Baroda, because Baroda has the advantage of having a little distance, because it was the first institute established post-independence with a new vision. And it so happened that the first vice chancellor had a vision that this should be part of university education. So it from day one has been like a graduate program, when many other institutes had to wait for another 3-4 decades to make that switch, because it was always seen as some sort of a technical education. With the exception of Shantiniketan, of course. But even there, it was very much part of the university education system, but once it became a central university, it took its time to convert to a degree system. So in that sense, Baroda, and it has people coming from JJ school, which had a British academic background. It had people coming from Shantiniketan, which were trained more into that kind of a pedagogy of openness and also a very strong rootedness. It also had people who are coming from traditional backgrounds. We were very fortunate to have a teacher who came from mural background of Rajasthan, and with no formal degrees. So just asking, to have somebody like that in today's educational institute would be very difficult with no degrees and no PhDs. It's kind of impossible to get into an institute of higher learning. But we were positioned in that unique situation. So talking generally about the problems of pedagogy is that people still sometimes adhere to things whose shelf life is over. And so what I want to tell both students and my colleagues is, when you do something, when you say something like a formula, that this is what it is done, this is how it is done, and this is how it is not done, it's probably very useful to ask yourself the question that why is it so? And by doing so, you often realize that there is a context from where that negativity comes from. And that context is long gone. So there is always a time to ask questions about why I'm doing this. Whether it's arranging a still life on a table, where does that convention come from? And sometimes we forget to ask these questions because they are handed down to us like givens, and we accept it as God given without actually raising these questions. The moment you start asking these questions, you will see that they have a beginning and they have a end date also, and they can always be renewed and reinvented. One just needs to think
There's a lot of blurry lines. It's like, when does a landscape end in a portrait?
Or when does a drawing becomes a painting?
A figure in
for
a
that
landscape,
matter.
and then if you get close enough, well, then does it become a portrait of somebody in a
Exactly.
landscape? There's all kinds of blurry lines that people have to think about.
So why do we think in terms of defining things before we even begin? That this is the definition. I mean, why are we so concerned about whether it is a drawing but close to the painting, and what's the problem with it?
Do you concentrate a lot on skill development or on concept development, or do you see them as very intertwined?
They are very intertwined, and as a pedagogic program here in this particular institute, what we try to do is to introduce them to all kinds of skills so that they acquire their necessary skills over the undergraduate first 2-3 years. And then, but simultaneously, they are also made to think and ask questions and made to look. I think that is very essential.
Yeah.
And none of the skills are taught in a sort of manner where it is dogmatic. So you are allowed to play with it. I can tell you that this is how this is done, and this is the reason why this is done like this. And if you don't do it, you won't get this result, but you may end up having some other result. So we don't actually put those, make them into watertight boxes that this is how this is done, and that is absolutely a dogma. So the
I,
dogmas
I,
are
I have a
actually-
question because I hear two different things from different sources. And one source, there are certain students who tell me, oh, in art school they don't teach us anything about the business side of art. We come out of school, we know nothing about the business side of art. Why don't they teach us that in school? And then also, oftentimes I meet students who seemed like the thing they're the best at is networking. They network constantly, which is sort of a side of that business side of art, being able to network. So where do you think the truth lies in that, if there is a truth? Do you think the school does a good job of imparting the business knowledge, or how do you survive in the
No,
art
I
world?
don't
as it
think we
exists, or
consciously
no?
try to impart any sense of business knowledge, but we do get a lot of visitors who, and if you are inclined that way, you have ample opportunities of networking. I
Right.
don't like that word particularly, but that's the word in currency. So
Getting to know people.
getting to know people, yes. And we were also taken to exhibitions. I actually, many of us insist that our students go and visit important exhibitions, not only in the city, but travel to other centers like Delhi and Bombay in particular. So they have some idea that there is a world that exists outside this pedagogical model of the Faculty of Fine Arts. It's not a complete insular world in itself. Having said that, I don't think we teach anybody the business side of it, and I don't think that strictly falls in our area of expertise either. But yeah, you would not like to handicap people by not making them aware of it. So yes, in as much as calling people or having professional artists coming and giving critique or giving talks, that happens almost on a continuous basis, and we have been very lucky that people come and offer their services like you have come. Lots of people just happen to pass by, they drop by, they talk to the students on their own, and we encourage that. And of course there is a structured lecture program where a lot of people come.
We try to keep these to 20 minutes because that seems to be the attention span on YouTube generally. But is there anything else you'd like to add to wrap this up? Anything you want to say in particular?
Well, I think the way pedagogy is heading, I think we will have to get out of this mindset of we the gurus and them the shishwas. Nobody comes like an empty vessel as far as pedagogy is concerned. Everybody comes with their ideas, their set of skills, and our job is to basically chisel that a bit and polish it here a little bit, and then wait for it to shine, and it often shines. And,
That whole Tagore system of sitting around the circle under the tree comes to mind.
Yeah.
It's like everybody is sharing. And you have a teacher or a
And
guru
what
like
am I?
yourself.
I mean, I'm just a colleague who's a few years senior, has seen a bit more of the world. Otherwise, your experience, if you're a student, is as valid as mine.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Indrapramit Roy, very nice for having this quick chat. Thank you for giving me the time.
You're welcome.
Right after
Pleasure.
your lunch. And you're off tomorrow somewhere, I know. So safe travels.
Thank you.
So this is Wazo X Wazo, Evil O from Baroda. Please remember to like and subscribe, however that goes. The buttons are below the video. Please like and subscribe to keep these videos going. And thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.